The knock came at 5:17 a.m. I know because I was staring at the clock, same as every morning since Robert died. 15 years of staring at that clock, 15 years of the same ritual. Wake at 5:15, make his coffee anyway, pour it down the sink at 5:30. Grief makes you do strange things. But when I opened that door and saw her belly, saw those photos on her phone, my husband, my dead husband, at a cafe I didn't recognize, wearing a jacket I'd never seen, smiling in a way I thought I'd buried, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know whether I was more afraid that he was alive, or that I'd been living with a ghost of a man who never existed at all. I'm Eleanor, and if you're watching this, something in that title probably grabbed you. Maybe you've had your own impossible moment. Maybe your reality has shattered in ways you can't explain to anyone because they'd think you were crazy. Maybe you know what it's like to discover that everything you thought was true was actually built on sand. And now you're standing in the rubble, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. I need you to understand something before we go any further. This video isn't about what he did. It's not about betrayal or lies or the mechanics of deception, though we'll talk about all of that. This is about what you do when the story you've been living inside collapses. Because here's what everyone gets wrong about these moments. They tell you it's about getting answers, finding closure, understanding why. They tell you to focus on the other person, their motives, their psychology, their apology or lack thereof. But that's the trap. That keeps you stuck. That makes them the center of your story even after they've destroyed it. What I'm offering you instead is this: a framework for when reality breaks, a way to rebuild your life not on the truth of what happened, but on the truth of who you are, despite what happened. You'll learn why your need for the story to make sense is actually keeping you trapped, why the truth you're chasing might be another prison, and how to construct a self that isn't dependent on anyone else's version of events. This is about reclaiming authorship of your life when someone else has been writing your chapters in invisible ink. And if you've ever felt like you don't know what was real anymore, if you've ever questioned your own memory, your own judgment, your own sanity, stay with me. We're going to find solid ground together. Not where you were, somewhere entirely new. So let me take you back to that doorway. Let me paint you the picture exactly as it happened, because the details matter. The details are where reality lives. It was February. Dark, cold. That kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes everything feel brittle. I was in my bathrobe, the blue one Robert gave me for our 10th anniversary. I hadn't replaced it. Hadn't replaced much of anything, actually. The house was a museum of our life together, everything preserved exactly as it had been the day he died. Or the day I thought he died. The knock wasn't loud, almost tentative, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they wanted to be there either. I wasn't expecting anyone. I never expected anyone at 5 in the morning. For a second I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Grief does that too, makes you hear things, see things, feel presences that aren't there. But then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Deliberate this time. I opened the door, and there she was. Young. So young. Couldn't have been more than 30. Pink slippers with bunny ears, which I remember thinking was such a strange detail to notice. But your brain does that when it's trying to process the impossible. It grabs onto the small things because the big things are too much. Pregnancy belly stretching a gray hoodie. Mascara rivers down her cheeks. And a phone. She was holding a phone out toward me like it was evidence, like it was proof, like it was a weapon. "Are you Eleanor?" she asked. Her voice was shaking. Everything about her was shaking. I nodded. I couldn't speak. Something in me already knew. The body knows before the mind catches up. That's what people don't tell you about trauma. Your nervous system recognizes the earthquake before the ground starts moving. "I'm Jessica," she said. "And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But I need to show you something." She thrust the phone at me and I took it. I don't know why. I should have closed the door, should have called the police, should have done anything except take that phone and look at the screen. But I looked. And there he was. Robert. My Robert. My dead husband. Sitting at an outdoor cafe, coffee cup in hand, sunlight on his face, alive. Undeniably, impossibly alive. Wearing a jacket I'd never seen, green, quilted, completely wrong for his taste. He hated green, or I thought he did. Smiling at whoever was taking the photo, smiling with this expression I didn't recognize. Open, relaxed, happy in a way that looked so natural, so easy, so completely unlike the careful, measured expressions I remembered from our marriage. When was this taken? I heard myself ask. My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from someone else's body. Last month, she whispered. January 14th. Last month. Not 15 years ago. Not before the funeral. Before the cremation. Before I scattered his ashes in the lake like he'd requested in the will. Last month. 4 weeks ago. While I was making his coffee and pouring it down the sink. While I was talking to his photo on the mantel. While I was living my careful, preserved, frozen life as his widow. That's impossible, I said. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. The photo was too clear, too real, too specific. The timestamp was there in the corner. The location tag, Portland, Oregon. I'd never been to Portland. Robert, my Robert, had always said he hated the Pacific Northwest. Too rainy, too gray, too depressing. Except apparently he didn't. Or the man I knew as Robert didn't. But maybe Richard did. He told me his name was Richard, Jessica said, and she was crying harder now, the words tumbling out in this desperate rush. Richard Morrison. We met 6 years ago at a co-working space. He said he was a consultant, traveled a lot for work. We've been together this whole time. And 7 months ago, I got pregnant. We were happy. We were planning the nursery. And then he just disappeared. Stopped answering calls. Stopped coming to my apartment. Just vanished. I thought he'd ghosted me. I thought he couldn't handle being a father. But then I found this. She took the phone back, scrolled, showed me another image. A utility bill, my address, the name Robert Harrison. I hired a private investigator, she continued. Cost me everything I had saved. And they found this address, found your name, found a death certificate from 2010. And I didn't understand. I still don't understand. How can he be dead and alive at the same time? How can he be Robert and Richard? How can he have been with me for 6 years and with you for… How long were you married? 15 years, I said. 15 years married. 15 years widowed. The math was doing itself in my head even though I didn't want it to. 15 years since his death. 6 years with her. That meant for the last 9 years of our marriage. While I was being the good wife. While I was supporting him through his cancer diagnosis. While I was holding his hand and believing we were facing death together, he was building another life, another identity, another entire existence in a city I'd never visited with a woman who thought she was his only one. Can I come in? Jessica asked. Please, I need to understand. I need to know if you have any idea where he is, if this is some kind of witness protection thing, if there's an explanation that makes sense, because right now I feel like I'm losing my mind. I stepped aside, let her in, made tea, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten alone for 15 years, the same table where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals, and we started comparing notes, constructing a timeline, trying to make the impossible make sense. She showed me more photos, dozens of them. Robert, or Richard, at a farmer's market, at a hiking trail, painting a nursery wall yellow, his hand on her belly, looking down with this expression of wonder. This pure, uncomplicated wonder that I'd never seen on his face. Not on our wedding day. Not when we talked about maybe having kids someday. Not ever. And with each photo, something in me was cracking. Not breaking, cracking. Like ice on a lake when the temperature shifts. You can hear it, this deep groaning sound, but you can't see the fractures yet. You just know something fundamental is changing at the structural level. Tell me about his cancer, Jessica said. The investigator found the death certificate. It said metastatic lung cancer. Was it sudden? 3 months, I said, from diagnosis to death. He deteriorated so fast, lost weight, lost hair, lost hope. The doctors said it was one of the most aggressive cases they'd seen. By the end, he didn't want visitors, didn't want people to see what the disease had done to him. The funeral was closed casket. I thought it was dignity. I thought he was protecting his memory. There was no cancer, Jessica said quietly. He was with me 3 months before he died, or before you thought he died. He was healthy. He was fine. We went kayaking. We were planning a trip to Cabo. The room tilted, actually tilted. Or maybe I was the one tilting and the room was staying still. I couldn't tell anymore. Because what she was saying meant that the deterioration I'd witnessed, the suffering I'd sat beside, the death I'd mourned, none of it was real. Or it was real for me, but it wasn't true. There's a difference between real and true. Real is what you experience. True is what actually happened, and sometimes they don't match up. I watched him die, I said, and my voice was this strange, hollow thing. I held his hand. I felt him go still. I watched the nurse turn off the monitors. I signed papers. I planned a funeral. I stood in front of 200 people and gave a eulogy about our beautiful life together, about his courage in the face of illness, about how he'd taught me what it meant to love someone through the worst thing. I cremated him. I scattered his ashes. How is any of this possible? Jessica was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What if it wasn't him? What if someone else died and he just left, staged it somehow?" I know that sounds insane. I know it does. But what's more insane, that he's been living double lives for years and we never noticed. We sat with that question, drank our tea, and slowly, carefully, we started pulling at threads. She showed me his phone number, different from the one I'd had for him. She showed me his email, different domain. She showed me photos of the apartment he kept in Portland. Modern, minimal, nothing like the traditional cluttered house we'd shared. Different furniture, different style, different everything. Did he ever talk about his family? I asked. He said they were estranged, Jessica said. Said his parents died when he was young, no siblings, no close relatives. He made it sound like I was his whole world, like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to build a family with. I laughed, couldn't help it, this high, bitter sound. He told me the same thing. Said he was an only child, parents gone, just him and me against the world. Turns out the world was bigger than either of us knew. There are others, aren't there? Jessica asked. If there's you and me, there are probably others. Probably, I said, and I felt something shift, some stubborn part of me that had been trying to make this make sense, trying to find the explanation that would let me keep the good memories intact, just gave up, let go, stopped trying. Because here's what I was starting to understand, sitting there with this pregnant stranger in my kitchen at 6 a.m. I didn't just lose my husband that day. I lost the story I'd been telling myself about my life. And the story was the thing I'd been clinging to, not the man. The story of the good marriage, the tragic illness, the devoted widow, the life well lived and honorably mourned. That story was my identity. It was how I understood myself, how I explained my choices, how I made sense of the years and the loneliness and the frozen, preserved existence I'd been calling a life. And if the story was a lie, if Robert wasn't who I thought he was, if the marriage wasn't what I'd believed, if the death wasn't even real, then who was I? That's the question that drops you into the void. Not who was he, but who am I if everything I thought I knew about my own life is fiction? Jessica left around 8. We exchanged numbers, promised to stay in touch, to share information if we found anything else. She hugged me at the door, this awkward belly between us hug, and said, "I'm sorry I brought this to you. I'm sorry I knocked." But I wasn't sorry. Not then, and not now. Because that knock, that impossible revelation, that shattering, it was the first real thing that had happened to me in 15 years. After she left, I did something I hadn't done since the day of Robert's funeral. I went into the garage. We had a two-car garage, but I'd only ever used half of it. The other half was Robert's stuff. Boxes and boxes of things I'd packed up after he died, but couldn't bring myself to go through. Couldn't donate, couldn't throw away. Just packed and labeled and stacked and preserved. Like if I kept everything exactly as it was, the grief would eventually make sense. I started opening boxes, tearing through them really. Not carefully, not reverently, just ripping tape and pulling out contents and spreading everything across the garage floor like I was conducting an investigation, which I guess I was. And I found things. So many things I'd never seen or never paid attention to. Bank statements from an account I didn't know existed. A whole separate financial life. Deposits and withdrawals from cities I'd never been to. Rent payments to addresses I'd never heard of. Receipts, hundreds of receipts. Coffee shops in Portland, Austin, Denver, Seattle. Restaurants, hotels, flower deliveries to addresses that weren't ours. A phone bill for a number I didn't recognize. Thousands of texts, calls lasting hours. Business cards. So many business cards. Different names on some of them. Richard Morrison, Rob Henderson, R.J. Harrison. Variations on the same identity, like he was trying on different versions of himself to see which one fit. And then, at the bottom of a box labeled Robert Personal, I found it. The thing that made everything undeniable. Another wedding ring. Not the one I had in my jewelry box, the one they'd removed from his body at the hospital. A different one. Simpler band, gold instead of platinum, and engraved on the inside, R+M, always. Not Jessica. Another woman. M. I started laughing. Sitting there on the cold garage floor, surrounded by evidence of lives I'd never known about, I started laughing. This high, strange sound I didn't recognize as my own, because it was so absurd, so completely, impossibly absurd. Not just two lives, multiple women, multiple identities, multiple wedding rings. How much energy does it take to sustain that? How much planning? How much compartmentalization? How do you keep the story straight? How do you remember which version of yourself you're supposed to be with which person? And the darkest question, the one I couldn't stop asking, how did I not know? That's the question that haunted me. Not what he did, but what I didn't see. Because there must have been signs. There must have been inconsistencies, moments where things didn't add up. But I'd smoothed them over, explained them away, chosen the comfort of the story over the discomfort of doubt. The weekend trips that were vague about details, the separate bank account that was just practical, the friends from work I never met, the phone calls he'd take in another room, the way he never wanted me to visit his office, the times he'd come home and seem surprised by our furniture arrangement, like he'd expected something different. I'd told myself he was private. Told myself he was stressed. Told myself I was being paranoid or insecure or demanding. I'd chosen to believe the story because the alternative was too destabilizing. And sitting there in that garage, I had to face something harder than his betrayal. My complicity. Not in the lies. I didn't know about those. But in the not looking, in the not asking, in the accepting of surface-level answers because going deeper felt risky. I'd been so committed to being the good wife, the understanding partner, the woman who didn't nag or pry or demand. And in that commitment, I'd given him all the space he needed to live entirely separate lives. Now, I want to pause here for a second and talk directly to you. Because if you're still watching, something in this is resonating. Maybe you haven't had a pregnant stranger show up at your door. Maybe your husband isn't living double lives across multiple cities. But maybe you've had your own version of this. The moment when you realize the story you've been telling yourself about your life, your relationship, your choices, maybe it's not the whole truth. Maybe there are things you've chosen not to see because seeing them would mean having to make different choices, harder choices, And here's what I need you to understand. That doesn't make you stupid. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. We all do this. We all construct narratives that make our lives bearable. And sometimes those narratives are close enough to the truth that we can live inside them comfortably. But sometimes, and this is the thing nobody prepares you for, sometimes reality just kicks the door down and refuses to let you keep pretending. If this is hitting home for you, if you're recognizing pieces of your own story in mine, I need you to do something. I need you to leave a comment right now, even if it's just one word, even if it's just same, or felt, or hear. Because I promise you, you're not alone in this. And when you comment, you're not just connecting with me, you're connecting with everyone else who's watching this, and nodding along, and feeling like maybe they're not crazy after all. So pause the video for just a second and leave that comment. Tell me what story you've been telling yourself. You don't have to give details, you don't have to explain, just acknowledge it. And then hit that subscribe button, because we're going somewhere with this. I'm not leaving you in the rubble. I'm going to show you how to build something real from the pieces. But I need to know you're with me. So comment, subscribe, and let's keep going together. All right. You still here? Good. Because this is where it gets harder before it gets better. This is where we stop focusing on what he did and start focusing on what happens next, on who you become when the ground gives out. So I spent the next few weeks in a kind of fog, going through the motions, going to work. I was an administrative assistant at a law firm, had been for 20 years, same desk, same routines, coming home, sitting in that garage surrounded by evidence, texting with Jessica. We'd become something like partners in this investigation, though neither of us knew what we were really looking for. She'd found Margaret, Margaret Chen, a veterinarian in Austin. Robert, or whatever he called himself with her, had been with her for 8 years. 8 years, longer than he'd been with Jessica. She'd thought they were engaged, had a ring and everything. Then he'd disappeared 2 years ago, told her he got a job overseas, promised to stay in touch. Never did. Margaret wasn't pregnant, didn't have photos from last month. But she had photos from before, and stories, and her own collection of lies that didn't match anyone else's lies. Different backstory, different personality almost. With Jessica, he'd been outdoorsy, adventurous, spontaneous. With Margaret, he'd been intellectual, quiet, thoughtful. With me, he'd been traditional, stable, reliable. It was like he'd customized himself to match what each woman wanted, became the perfect partner for each person by just not being a whole person, by being a mirror instead of a self. And here's what that taught me, though I didn't understand it yet. We don't usually fall in love with people. We fall in love with the way they make us feel about ourselves. Robert was a master at that. He made each of us feel seen, special, chosen. He reflected back exactly what we needed to feel, and in doing that, he never had to show us who he actually was, if he even knew. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because at this point, I was still trying to solve the mystery, still trying to get the full picture, still thinking that if I just understood enough, gathered enough evidence, constructed a complete enough timeline, then I'd have closure. Then I could move on. That's the trap, you see. The belief that understanding equals healing. That if you just know why someone did what they did, you can make peace with it. But understanding is just another story, another narrative. And if the first narrative trapped you, what makes you think a more complete narrative will set you free? I hired a private investigator, same one Jessica had used. Cost me $3,000 I didn't really have, but I needed answers, needed to know the scope of it. How many women? How many identities? How he'd managed the logistics. The investigator came back 3 weeks later with a file 2 inches thick. And what was in that file? I don't even know how to describe it. It was like looking at a stranger's life. Multiple properties, multiple bank accounts, multiple social media profiles under different names. A whole network of lies so elaborate, so carefully maintained, that it must have been a full-time job just keeping track of it all. 4 women total. Me, Jessica, Margaret, and a woman named Caroline in Denver, who he'd been with for 3 years before ghosting her 5 years ago. Each relationship overlapping. Each woman believing she was the only one. Each of us with our own version of who he was. And the death? The investigator found that too. A John Doe who'd died in a hospital 3 hours away. Homeless man. No family. No identification. Similar age. Similar build. Robert had somehow, and the investigator couldn't prove this part, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Robert had somehow claimed the body, used it to stage his own death, filed the death certificate, had a closed casket funeral, and then he'd just continued. Kept living his other lives. Kept being Richard in Portland, Rob in Austin, RJ in Denver. Kept collecting relationships like some people collect stamps. When the investigator told me this, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Is he alive now? Do you know where he is? And the investigator said, as of 6 months ago, yes, Portland. But the trail goes cold after that. He might have moved again, might have started over somewhere new. Or what? Or he might have actually died this time. I found a hospital admission in Seattle 2 months ago. Same name he used with Jessica. But the records are sealed. Could be nothing. Could be something. I can keep looking if you want. I told him no. Told him I had enough. Paid him the balance and took the file home. And that night, I sat with all of it. The photos, the bank statements, the timeline, the evidence of a life so fractured and compartmentalized that it barely seemed human. And I realized none of this mattered. Not the where or the why or the how. Not whether he was alive or dead. Not whether there were 4 women or 14. Because all of that was still about him, still making him the center, still giving him the power to define my reality. And what I needed, what I desperately, urgently needed, was to stop asking questions about him and start asking questions about me. Not, how could he do this, but why did I need the lie? Not, who was he really, but who am I without the story? Not, how do I get closure, but how do I build a life that doesn't require his truth to be solid ground? That's the shift. That's the moment everything changes. When you stop being a detective in someone else's crime and start being the author of your own next chapter. And let me tell you, that shift is terrifying. Because being the detective is easier. Following clues, gathering evidence, constructing timelines, that gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of control, a sense that you're doing something productive. But authoring your own life when you don't even know who you are anymore? When every identity you've claimed has been in relation to someone else? When you've been Robert's wife and then Robert's widow for 30 years and now you're just Eleanor? Who the hell is Eleanor? I didn't know. Genuinely didn't know. I'd been a wife for so long and then a widow that I'd never developed a self separate from those roles. My hobbies were things we did together. My friends were couple friends who drifted away after he died. My routines were built around his schedule, his preferences, his memory. Strip all that away and what's left? That's the void. That's the terrifying, liberating, impossible void. And you have 2 choices when you're standing in that void. You can try to fill it quickly with something, anything, to avoid the discomfort. New relationship, new identity, new story that's just as incomplete as the old one. Or you can sit in it, learn to tolerate the emptiness, learn to be with yourself without a narrative, without a role, without a definition. I chose the second one, not because I'm brave or enlightened, but because I didn't have the energy to construct another lie, even a lie I told myself. So I started small. I started with mornings. For 15 years, I'd woken up at 5:15 and made Robert's coffee. Same routine, every single day. It was my way of honoring him, of keeping him alive in some small way. It made me feel connected to something larger than my own grief. But the morning after I finished reading the investigator's report, I woke up at 5:15 and I didn't make the coffee. I just sat there, at the kitchen table, in silence, watching the clock. 5:20, 5:25, 5:30. The time came and went when I would normally pour the coffee down the sink, and I felt nothing, and also everything. Grief and relief and guilt and freedom all tangled together in this impossible knot. At 5:45, I got up and made coffee the way I actually like it, with cinnamon and honey. The way Robert always said was too sweet, so I'd stopped making it that way even after he died because it felt like a betrayal. But he'd betrayed me first. And also, he was never who I thought he was, so his preferences didn't actually matter anymore. I made my coffee, my way, and I sat at the table and I cried. Not the pretty, cathartic crying you see in movies, the ugly kind. The kind where your face gets all swollen and your nose runs, and you make sounds you didn't know you could make. I cried for the woman I'd been, the one who'd made coffee for a ghost every morning, the one who'd built a shrine out of a life that never existed, the one who'd chosen preservation over living. And when I was done crying, I felt lighter, not happy, not healed, just lighter. Like I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there. That was the first morning. The second morning I did the same thing. Woke up, didn't make his coffee. Made mine instead. Still cried, but less. Third morning, same. By the end of the week it wasn't painful anymore. It was just what I did. I made my coffee. I sat at my table. I started the day as myself, not as someone's widow. Small change. Tiny, really. But it was the beginning of something. Because here's what I was learning. You don't rebuild a life in one dramatic moment. You don't wake up one day and suddenly know who you are. You rebuild in increments, in small, daily choices that slowly accumulate into a new normal. I started rearranging furniture. Just a little at first. Moved a chair. Changed which side of the bed I slept on. Hung a picture in a different spot. Robert had hated change, had wanted everything in its place, and I'd maintained that even after his death, because changing things felt like erasing him. But he'd already erased himself, or maybe he'd never been there to begin with. So I changed things, and the house started to feel less like a museum and more like a place where someone actually lived. I joined a painting class, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for because I was busy being a wife, being a caretaker, being a mourner. I was terrible at painting, genuinely awful. But it didn't matter because I was doing it for me, not for any outcome, just for the experience of putting color on canvas and seeing what happened. I started saying no to things, church commitments I'd maintained out of obligation, social events I didn't actually enjoy, the assumption that I'd always be available because what else did a widow have to do? I said no, and people were surprised, and I didn't explain, didn't justify, just no. Each of these things was small. None of them were dramatic or Instagram-worthy or the kind of thing you'd put in a memoir chapter titled, How I Found Myself. But together, they were building something, a self, a life, an Eleanor who existed independent of anyone else's narrative. And about 3 months into this process, something shifted. I stopped checking the investigator's file, stopped refreshing Jessica's social media to see if she'd posted updates, stopped wondering where Robert was or if he was alive or if he ever thought about me, because I realized it didn't matter. None of it mattered. His story was his to carry, and I had my own story to write. That's the lesson I want you to take from this first part. The thing I need you to understand before we go any further. You don't grieve people, you grieve stories. The man I mourned for 15 years didn't exist. Not because Robert wasn't real. There was a body, a marriage license, shared meals and moments. But the story I told about Robert, faithful husband, victim of disease, love of my life cut tragically short, that was fiction. And here's the brutal truth nobody wants to hear. Most of what we call memory is actually narrative construction. You don't remember events, you remember the story you've told yourself about events. And every time you retell it, you reinforce certain details and erase others. You smooth the rough edges. You make it make sense. I'd spent 15 years constructing Robert as a tragic hero. Every memory was curated to fit that narrative. The fights? Just stress from work. The distance? He was protecting me from worry about the illness. The secrets? He was private. That's just who he was. The story was so complete, so polished, that reality literally couldn't penetrate it. Even when Jessica showed me those photos, my first instinct was to find a way to make them fit the existing narrative. Maybe they were doctored. Maybe it was a twin. Maybe this was a scam. Because we would rather create increasingly elaborate explanations than admit the story is wrong. Think about your own life right now. What narrative are you protecting? What would you have to lose if it turned out to be incomplete or false? The job you tell yourself you're passionate about, even though Sunday nights fill you with dread. The friend you defend even though they've hurt you repeatedly. The relationship you call complicated because failed feels too final. The version of yourself you present to the world that's exhausting to maintain, but feels safer than being fully seen. We are story-making creatures, and we will sacrifice reality itself to keep the story intact, because the story tells us who we are. And if the story breaks, we have to face the terrifying possibility that we don't know who we are at all. So the first work, the real work, is learning to hold your narratives lightly. To say this is the story I've been telling instead of this is what happened. Because what happened is always bigger, messier, more contradictory than any story can contain. Robert happened. The marriage happened. The grief happened. All of that is real. But the story I told about what it all meant? That was constructed. And when new information came in that didn't fit the construction, I had a choice. Defend the story or rebuild my understanding of reality. For 15 years, I defended the story, and it kept me frozen, kept me small, kept me living in the past. When I finally let the story break, when I finally admitted I didn't know what was true anymore, that's when I could start building something real. Not a story about what happened to me, a life based on who I'm choosing to become. And that brings me to the second lesson, the one that's even harder to swallow. The truth will not set you free, but uncertainty might. I know. That sounds wrong. We're taught that truth is the goal, that if we just get to the bottom of things, if we just understand why, if we just get all the facts, then we'll have closure. Then we can move on. But here's what I learned through all those weeks of investigation. All those files and timelines and evidence. The truth is another cage. Let's say I'd found every woman, mapped every lie, constructed a perfect timeline of everywhere Robert had been and everything he'd done, gotten a full confession from him about his motives and methods. What would that give me? A more complete story. But still a story about him. Still my identity constructed in relation to what he did to me. The truth would still make him the center, the author, the one with the power, and I'd still be a character in his narrative, just with more pages to read. The shift came when I stopped asking what was true and started asking, what do I want to be true now? Not about the past. I'll never fully know the past. The past is gone and it took its secrets with it whether Robert is alive or dead. But about now, about this moment, about who I am sitting here in my kitchen with my cinnamon coffee, not as his wife or his widow, but as myself. What do I want to be true about Eleanor? What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of life do I want to build? Those questions don't require his participation, don't require his confession or explanation or apology, don't require me to understand his psychology or trace his movements or solve the mystery of who he really was. They only require me to decide, to choose, to author. This is the paradox. You find freedom not by discovering the truth, but by accepting that you don't need it. You don't need to know why he lied. You don't need his side of the story. You don't need the narrative to make sense. You only need to decide, am I going to let this define me, or am I going to let this refine me? There's a concept in Buddhism called beginner's mind. It's about approaching life without preconceptions, without the weight of accumulated stories. Fresh eyes, open heart, willing to be surprised. When everything I believed shattered, I was forced into beginner's mind. I didn't know what was real anymore. I didn't know who I'd been married to. I didn't know if any memory could be trusted. And in that groundlessness, that terrifying uncertainty, I found something I never expected: freedom. Because if I don't know what was true, then I'm not bound by it. I can choose what to carry forward and what to leave behind. I can decide which memories serve me and which ones keep me trapped. I can author my own meaning instead of inheriting someone else's. Let me give you an example. Our wedding day. In the old story, it was the happiest day of my life, the beginning of our beautiful journey together. Proof that true love exists. When I found out about the other women, that memory became poisoned, tainted, a lie I'd believed, evidence of my own foolishness. But here's what I learned to do. I separated my experience from his intention. On that day, I felt joy. I felt hope. I felt loved. Those feelings were real, regardless of what he was thinking or planning or hiding. My internal experience is valid independent of external validation. So now, when I think about our wedding day, I don't think about what it meant about us. I think about what it revealed about me, about my capacity for hope, about my ability to be fully present in a moment, about the version of myself who believed in something beautiful and committed fully to it. That person, that hopeful, committed, all-in Eleanor, she's not stupid, she's not a victim, she's actually pretty brave. And I don't have to throw her away just because the story changed. I can acknowledge the lie and still claim the experience. They're both real. This is the work. This is the daily practice of rebuilding. Not erasing the past. Not pretending it didn't happen or that it didn't hurt. But separating what happened from what it means. Taking back the power to assign meaning. Robert doesn't get to decide what our wedding day means to me now, or what our marriage meant, or even what his betrayal means. I decide. I'm the one who has to live with the memories, so I'm the one who gets to choose what they're evidence of. And I choose to let them be evidence of my capacity to love fully, trust deeply, and stay open even when it's risky. Those are qualities I'm proud of. Those are things I want to keep. The fact that he didn't match that energy, that's his loss, his limitation, his tragedy, not mine. Mine is what I build next. So here's where we are. About 9 months after the knock. I've stopped investigating. I've started living. Small steps, daily choices, building a self that doesn't require anyone else's validation or explanation. And then something happened that I didn't expect. Something that brought everything into sharp focus and forced me to make a choice I'd been avoiding. Jessica went into labor. It was early, she was only 34 weeks, and she was alone and terrified, and she called me, because apparently in the 9 months since we'd met, I'd become the closest thing she had to family. So I went to the hospital, sat with her through contractions, held her hand, breathed with her, watched her become a mother to a 6-pound baby girl she named Sophie. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Gratitude. Not for the situation, not for the betrayal or the lies or any of it, but for the fact that this bizarre, impossible circumstance had connected me to another human being in a real way, had pulled me out of my isolated, frozen existence and made me part of something living and messy and real. Jessica and I weren't friends in the traditional sense. We were more like survivors of the same disaster, war buddies, people who'd seen each other at the absolute worst and somehow came out the other side. And in the hospital room, while she was holding Sophie and crying tears that were joy and exhaustion and grief all mixed together, she said, "I'm glad he's not here. I'm glad it's just us. Is that horrible?" And I said, "No, it's honest." Because here's what we'd both learned. His absence was less painful than his presence would have been. The uncertainty of not knowing where he was or what he was doing, that was actually easier than the constant vigilance of trying to figure out which version of him was real. We'd both loved ghosts. And ghosts, at least, don't lie to your face. Real people? Real people are complicated. And Robert had never been willing to be complicated in front of us. He'd only been willing to be perfect, which is just another way of being absent. I stayed at the hospital for 3 days, helped Jessica with the baby, taught her things I'd learned from nieces and nephews, sat with her in the dark, quiet hours of early morning when Sophie wouldn't sleep and Jessica was too tired to think straight. And on the 3rd day, he showed up. I was in the hospital cafeteria getting coffee when I saw him. 15 years of imagining this moment. Hundreds of fantasies about what I'd say, how I'd react. Would I scream? Would I cry? Would I demand answers? And when it actually happened, I felt nothing. Just this strange, flat calm. He looked older, grayer, smaller somehow. Like the lies had been the thing holding him upright, and without them he was just a tired man in a wrinkled shirt. We made eye contact across the cafeteria. And for a second I thought he might run, but he didn't. He walked over, stood across from me with his hands in his pockets like we were old acquaintances catching up. "Eleanor," he said. Just my name, like it was a complete sentence. "You're not supposed to be here," I said. "Jessica said if you showed up she'd call security." "I know, but it's my daughter. My daughter. Singular possessive. Like Sophie was the only child he'd ever created. Like the rest of us were just, what? Footnotes?" "You have no children," I said. And I was surprised by how steady my voice was, how certain. "You have consequences. And one of those consequences is named Sophie. But she's not yours. You gave up that right when you disappeared." He looked like I'd slapped him. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt people. But I'm trying to make it right. I want to be there for her. I want to—" "You want," I interrupted. "You want. What about what everyone else needs? What about the 4 women whose lives you fractured? What about the trust you destroyed? What about the fact that I buried you? I cremated you. I mourned you for 15 years, Robert. Or Richard. Or whatever the hell your name actually is." "It's Robert," he said quietly. "That's the name I was born with. That's who I actually am." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "You don't get to claim that. You don't get to say who you actually are when you've been a different person to everyone you've ever known. You're whoever each of us needed you to be, which means you're no one." "I'm trying to change," he said. "I'm in therapy. I'm working on it. I want to do better." And here's the thing. I believed him. I could see he meant it. Could see he was genuinely trying to understand himself, to piece together why he'd lived the way he'd lived. But I also knew his healing is not my responsibility. His growth is not my concern. And his desire to make amends does not obligate me to participate. "I'm glad you're getting help," I said. "Truly. I hope you figure out whatever it is you need to figure out. But that's between you and your therapist. It's not between you and me. Not anymore. Don't I at least deserve a chance to explain? Deserve?" I set down my coffee, looked at him directly. "You don't deserve anything from me. Not my time, not my understanding, not my forgiveness. You lost the right to anything from me the day you faked your own death and let me grieve a ghost." "I'm sorry," he said. And he looked it. Genuinely looked broken and sorry, and desperate for absolution. And I felt nothing, not compassion, not rage, just this clean, clear boundary. "I believe you're sorry," I said, "but sorry doesn't undo what happened. Sorry doesn't give me back 15 years. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that I don't know which memories are real and which ones were performance, so you can keep your sorry. I don't need it. Then what do you need? He asked. Tell me what you need and I'll do it. And that's when I understood the final lesson, the one that set me completely free. I don't need anything from you, I said. And that's the point. For 15 years, my entire identity was wrapped up in you. In being your wife, then your widow. In the story of us. And when that story broke, I thought I needed you to give me a new one. I needed you to explain, to apologize, to help me make sense of it all. But I don't. I don't need your truths. I don't need your story. I have my own. I picked up my coffee, turned to walk away. Eleanor, he called after me, will you tell Jessica I came? Will you tell her I want to be involved? I looked back at him. This man who'd shaped so much of my life, who I'd loved and mourned and built my entire existence around. And I said, no, that's between you and her. I'm done being the messenger in your story. I've got my own to write. And I walked away. Left him standing there in the hospital cafeteria. And I felt lighter with every step. Not because I'd gotten closure, not because he'd given me answers or apologies that satisfied me, but because I'd finally understood that closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you give yourself when you decide their story no longer defines yours. I went back upstairs. Told Jessica he'd been there, told her what I'd said. And then I told her something else. Whatever you decide about him, I said. Whether you let him be part of Sophie's life or you keep him out, that's your choice. And I support you either way. But I'm done with him. Done investigating. Done trying to understand. Done letting him take up space in my head. I came here for you and Sophie, not for him. And that's where I'm staying. She nodded, looked down at Sophie sleeping in her arms, and said, I think I'm done too. I think I just needed permission to be done. You don't need permission, I said. You just need to choose it. And in that moment, something happened. Something shifted between us. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were two women actively choosing our next chapters, independently, powerfully. Not defined by what he did, but by what we decided to do next. That was 10 months ago. And here's where I am now. I'm not healed. I don't know if anyone ever fully heals from something like this. But I'm whole. There's a difference. Healing suggests you go back to what you were before. Wholeness means you integrate what happened into who you are now. I'm still Eleanor. Still have moments where I wonder what was real. Still have days where the anger comes back sharp and unexpected. Still have dreams where Robert is alive and I wake up confused about which reality I'm in. But I also have new routines that are mine. New friendships that aren't based on couple dynamics. New confidence in my own perception. New willingness to trust myself even when I don't have all the answers. I see Jessica and Sophie regularly. We've built something neither of us expected. Not quite family, not quite friendship, but something real and chosen and ours. I haven't contacted Margaret or Caroline. That's their journey, not mine. But I hope they've found their own versions of peace. And Robert? I don't know where he is. Don't know if he's alive or dead. Don't check social media or ask around or hire investigators. Because his story is no longer mine to follow. I've got my own path now, and it doesn't run through him anymore. So let me bring this full circle. Let me tell you what I want you to take from this. When reality breaks, when the story you've been living inside collapses, you have two choices. You can spend your life trying to put the broken pieces back together exactly as they were, trying to restore the story, trying to make sense of the senseless of me, trying to get the truth that will finally let you rest. Or you can accept that the broken pieces will never fit together the same way again. And instead of restoration, you can build something entirely new, something that doesn't require anyone else's truth to stand firm. Something based not on what happened to you, but on who you're choosing to become through it. The first path keeps you stuck. The second path sets you free. And freedom doesn't mean you're not hurt. Doesn't mean you're not angry, doesn't mean you don't have scars. Freedom means the hurt and the anger and the scars don't get the final word. You do. Here's what I know now that I didn't know when Jessica knocked on my door. I am not the story that happened to me. I am the author of what happens next. That's the truth that matters. Not what Robert did or why he did it or whether he's sorry, but that I get to choose every morning, every moment, every breath. I choose to make my coffee the way I like it, to rearrange my furniture, to take up painting even though I'm terrible at it, to say no without explaining, to build friendships based on presence, not history, to trust my perceptions even when they're incomplete, to hold memories lightly instead of letting them hold me. I choose to live instead of haunt, and you can too, whatever your version of this is, whatever story you've been living inside that's starting to crack, whatever truth you're avoiding because facing it means having to rebuild everything. You can choose not to forget, not to pretend it didn't hurt, not to skip over the grief or the rage or the confusion, but to let all of that be the raw material instead of the final product. To take the worst thing that happened and refuse to let it have the final word. That's your power, that's your freedom, that's your story to write. So if this has resonated with you, if you see yourself somewhere in my journey, I want to invite you to do something. First, I need you to leave a comment. Tell me in one sentence, what story are you ready to stop living inside? What narrative has been defining you that maybe isn't serving you anymore? You don't have to share details. You don't have to explain your whole situation. Just one sentence. I'm ready to stop being, or I'm done letting, define me. Whatever feels true. Because when you name it, you start to loosen its grip. And when you share it, you realize you're not alone. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of people watching this who are carrying similar weights. So be the first to put yours down. Comment right now. Second, if you want to see what comes next, if you want Chapter 2 where I show you how I rebuilt, the daily practices I used, the moment I finally came face to face with him again, and what I learned about forgiveness that nobody talks about, hit that subscribe button. Because I'm not leaving you in the rubble. This is just the beginning. The shattering is part 1. The rebuilding is part 2. And you deserve to see both. And third, if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's had their reality broken and doesn't know how to move forward, send them this video. Not as advice, not as a solution, just as a reminder that it's possible to build something real from the pieces, that they're not crazy, that the confusion and anger and grief are all valid, and that there's a path through, even when they can't see it yet. This is Eleanor, and I'm so grateful you're here. Grateful you stayed with me through this story. Grateful you're willing to look at your own stories with honest eyes. You're not broken. The story broke, and that's different. You're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to be real. And there's nothing more powerful than that. 3 months after Jessica showed up, I did the unthinkable. I called him. Not from my phone. I'm not reckless. I used a burner, blocked number, hands shaking so hard I could barely dial. And when he answered, when I heard his voice, that voice I'd mourned, that voice I'd played in my head like a broken record for 15 years, he said, I was wondering when you'd call. Not surprised. Not apologetic. Just expectant. Like he'd been waiting. Like this was all part of some script I hadn't been given. And in that moment, I understood. He wasn't the monster. He was the mirror. And I had to decide what I was willing to see. Welcome to Chapter 2. If you're here, you've already survived the shattering. You've already faced the impossible thing, the betrayal, the revelation, the moment reality broke. But now comes the harder part. What do you build in the rubble? Because here's what nobody tells you about reconstruction. It's not about getting back to who you were. That person is gone, and that's okay. The common advice at this stage is find yourself again, reclaim your joy, don't let them win. But that's still making it about them. That's still living in reaction. What I'm offering you in this chapter is different. A framework for building a self that isn't defined by what happened to you, but by what you choose to do with what happened. This is about agency in the aftermath, about becoming someone entirely new, not in spite of the trauma, but through it. You'll learn how to face the person who broke your reality and why you might not need to. How to reclaim memories without needing them to mean what you thought they meant. How to build relationships where you're not constantly checking for lies. How to trust yourself again when your own judgment feels compromised. This chapter is for the rebuilders. The ones ready to stop asking, "Why did this happen?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming because of what happened?" The transformation isn't from broken to fixed. It's from haunted to whole. Let me tell you about that phone call. Because it was a turning point I didn't expect. A moment where everything I thought I'd processed came rushing back in a different form. It was late, maybe 11 at night. I'd been lying in bed staring at the ceiling, which had become my new ritual. Used to be making coffee. Now it was staring at the ceiling and replaying conversations in my head. Different versions of what I should have said, would have said, could have said if I'd known the truth. And something in me just snapped. This overwhelming need to hear his voice, not to yell at him, not to demand answers, just to know if he was real, if any of it had been real. Because in the months since Jessica's revelation, I'd started to feel like I was losing my grip on what was actual and what was constructed. So I bought a burner phone at a convenience store. Felt ridiculous doing it, like I was in a spy movie. But I needed the separation, needed to know he couldn't trace it back to me, couldn't use it to worm his way back into my life. I had his number, the one from the investigator's file, the one he'd used with Jessica. I sat in my car in the parking lot of that convenience store and I dialed. Each number felt like a small act of violence against myself, like I was betraying the version of me who'd walked away from him at the hospital, who'd claimed her power and her story. But I needed to know. That's the thing about closure. People tell you you don't need it, that you should just move on, that reaching out is a sign of weakness. But sometimes you need to complete the circle, not for them, for you. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times, and I thought maybe he wouldn't answer. Maybe this number was dead. Maybe he'd disappeared again into another identity, another city, another set of lies. Then he picked up. "Hello?" His voice, exactly as I remembered it, warm, familiar. The voice that had said, "I love you, and I'm dying, and I'll always take care of you." I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. My whole body went rigid. "Hello?" he said again. "I know someone's there." "It's me," I managed. My voice sounded strange, small, like it was coming from very far away. Silence. Long, heavy silence. And then, "I was wondering when you'd call." Just expectation. Like he'd been waiting for this. Like he knew I couldn't actually walk away without this conversation. And that pissed me off. Broke through the paralysis. Made me remember why I'd spent 9 months trying not to do exactly this. "You were wondering," I said, flat, cold. "You were wondering when I'd call. Like this is just another scene in your script. Like you knew I'd eventually break down and reach out." "I know you, Eleanor. I know you need to understand things. Need them to make sense." "You don't know me," I said. "You knew a version of me, the version you created. The one who'd accept vague answers and separate bank accounts and weekend trips you never explained. But you don't know this me, the one who's been living in the wreckage you left behind." "I'm sorry," he said, and he sounded it, genuinely sounded broken and sorry. "I know that doesn't mean anything. I know sorry doesn't undo what I did, but I am. I'm so sorry." "Why'd you do it?" I asked. The question I'd been avoiding for months. The one I told myself didn't matter. "Why fake your death? Why not just leave? Why make me grieve you?" He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing, could picture him wherever he was, Portland, Seattle, some new city with some new name, trying to figure out what answer would satisfy me. Because, he finally said, I couldn't figure out how to leave you without being the villain, and I couldn't figure out how to stay without eventually being found out. The cancer diagnosis, at first it was just an excuse to explain why I was distant, why I was losing weight from stress, why I needed time alone. But then it became an exit strategy, a way to leave without anyone being angry. Everyone feels sorry for a widow. Nobody blames a dead man. So you used my grief as a shield, I said. Let me mourn you so you could be free. Yes, he said simply. Yes, that's exactly what I did. The honesty was jarring. I'd expected defensiveness, excuses, explanations about his childhood or his mental health or his fear of commitment. But he was just stating facts. And the other women? I asked. How many were there really? Do you actually want to know? He asked. Or are you asking because you think you're supposed to want to know? That stopped me. Because he was right. Some part of me was asking out of obligation, out of the sense that I was supposed to demand full disclosure. But did I actually want the details? Did I actually need them? I don't know, I admitted. I thought I did. I thought if I just knew everything, I could make sense of it. But now I'm realizing, what would change? If it was 4 women or 14? If it was 6 years or 16, does the number change what I need to do next? No, he said. It doesn't. And that's why you called, not for information, for permission. Permission for what? To stop caring, to stop trying to understand, to let me be the mystery and get on with your life. I felt tears on my face and I hadn't even realized I was crying, because he was right. Again. I'd called him because some part of me needed to hear his voice and feel nothing. Needed to confirm that the power he'd had over me was gone, that I could engage with him and not fall apart, not need him, not even hate him with the kind of intensity that's just inverted attachment. I built my whole life around you, I said quietly. Around being your wife, around mourning you, around the story of us. And now I'm trying to build something that's just mine. But I keep getting stuck because I keep thinking I need to understand you first. Need to know why you did what you did so I can make sure I never fall for it again. Never let someone lie to me like that again. Eleanor, he said, and his voice was gentle in a way that made me angry because he didn't deserve to be gentle. You didn't let me lie to you. I lied. That's on me. And no amount of vigilance on your part would have stopped it because I was committed to the deception. You could have been the most suspicious, untrusting person in the world, and I still would have found ways to maintain the lie. Because the lie wasn't about you. It was about me not being able to exist as one whole person. What does that mean? It means I'm broken, he said. Deeply, fundamentally broken, in ways I'm only starting to understand. I couldn't be a whole person with anyone, because I didn't know how to be a whole person with myself. So I fragmented, became different people in different places. And each fragment was real, in its way. The version of me that loved you, that was real. But it was only a piece, and I kept the pieces separate because I was terrified that if anyone saw all of me, they'd see that there was nothing there. No core, no consistent self. Just a collection of performances. I didn't know what to say to that, because it was the most honest thing he'd ever told me. And it didn't make what he did okay. Didn't excuse any of it. But it did make it comprehensible. Not as a choice to hurt me, but as a symptom of something much deeper. Are you getting help? I asked. Yes, finally. Real help. Not just therapy where I perform insights, but actual hard work on understanding why I am the way I am. Good, I said, and I meant it. I hope you heal, I genuinely do, but not for me, for you, and for anyone else you might try to have a relationship with in the future. I'm not having relationships anymore, he said. I'm alone. Completely alone. And I'm learning to be okay with that, learning to be just one person in one place with no escape routes. How's that going? It's terrible, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Turns out running away is a lot easier than standing still. We were quiet for a moment, and in that quiet, something shifted. I realized I didn't hate him, didn't love him, didn't even really know him. He was just a person, a broken person, a person whose brokenness had collided with my life and caused damage. But the damage wasn't about me, wasn't evidence of my inadequacy or blindness or failure. It was just what happens when fragments collide with wholeness. The fragments shatter, the wholeness bends. And then everyone has to decide what to do with the pieces. I'm not going to call you again, I said. This is it. This is the conversation. And I need you to know that I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because I need to build a life that doesn't include you in any form. Not as a villain, not as a victim, not even as a mystery to solve, just absent. Can you respect that? Yes, he said. I can. And Eleanor? Yeah? Thank you for being kind. You didn't have to be. I wasn't being kind to you, I said. I was being kind to myself. Bitterness is exhausting, and I don't have energy to waste on hating you. Still, he said. Thank you. I hung up, sat in my car, and felt the strangest sense of completion. Not closure. Closure suggests a clean ending, a resolution. This was more like acknowledgement. I'd said what I needed to say, heard what I needed to hear, and now I could let it go. I drove home, threw the burner phone in a dumpster, and I never contacted him again. That phone call taught me something crucial, something I need you to understand if you're going through your own version of this. Compassion does not require reconciliation. You can have deep empathy for why someone did what they did and still refuse to let them do it again. You can understand the psychology of their brokenness and still protect yourself from the consequences of their unhealed wounds. Let me say that again, because it's important. Compassion does not require reconciliation. Understanding is not the same as accepting. Empathy is not the same as consent. I understand Robert's fear now. I understand the psychology of compartmentalization. I understand that hurt people hurt people. I understand that his deception came from a place of profound disconnection from himself. And I also understand that I deserve relationships built on honesty, presence, and courage. Those two things coexist. They don't contradict each other. They're both true at the same time. Here's the practice I want you to try. When you feel yourself sliding into, but they didn't mean to, or they were doing their best, add this sentence, and that doesn't mean I have to participate in their dysfunction. Their trauma is real. Their pain is valid. Their fear is understandable. And you get to protect yourself from the consequences of their unhealed wounds. This isn't cruelty. It's clarity. You can wish someone well from a distance. You can hope they heal. You can release them with love. And you can also never speak to them again. Both are true. Both are allowed. After that phone call, I thought I was done. Thought I'd processed everything I needed to process. Thought the hard work was over, and now it was just about building my new life. But then something happened that showed me I still had work to do. That understanding Robert's brokenness didn't mean I'd healed my own. I tried to date. I know. Seems obvious, right? After a year of processing, of rebuilding, of reclaiming myself, of course I'd eventually want connection again. Want intimacy. Want to share my life with someone. But here's what I discovered. I had no idea how to be in a relationship as a whole person. I'd only ever been in relationship as a performance, as the version of myself I thought someone else needed. With Robert, I'd been the accommodating wife, the one who didn't ask too many questions, who gave space, who made everything easy. And even though I knew that version of me had been partially constructed, had been reactive rather than authentic, I didn't know who I actually was when I wasn't performing. So I went on dates, used apps, which was a whole bizarre learning curve at 62 years old. Let me tell you, dating in your 60s after being with one person since your 20s is like landing on an alien planet. Everyone has histories, complications, grown children, ex-spouses, baggage upon baggage. And I thought I was ready, thought I'd done the work, thought I could show up as myself and build something real. But on every single date, I found myself doing the same thing, trying to figure out what version of Eleanor this person would like, asking questions to gather data about their preferences so I could mold myself to fit, minimizing my own needs, making myself easy. And the worst part? I didn't even realize I was doing it until the third date with a man named Paul. Nice guy, widower, lost his wife to Alzheimer's 5 years ago. We had a lot in common on paper. Similar histories, similar stages of life, similar interest in rebuilding. We were at dinner and he asked what kind of movies I liked. Simple question. And I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know what kind of movies I liked, because for 30 years I'd watched what Robert wanted to watch, and for 15 years after that I'd barely watched movies at all because it felt too lonely. So I said, I'm not sure. What do you like? And he laughed and said, I asked you first. And I just sat there, frozen, because this tiny, insignificant question had exposed something massive. I didn't know myself. I knew the versions of myself I'd performed. But the actual Eleanor? Her preferences, her desires, her authentic responses to the world? She was a stranger to me. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and I thought, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready to share myself with someone else because I don't even know who I'm sharing. I went back to the table, told Paul I appreciated his time, but I needed to focus on myself for a while. He was gracious, said he understood. We parted as friends, and I went home and I cried. Not because I'd lost a potential relationship, but because I'd realized how much work I still had to do. How much of myself I'd never developed because I'd been too busy being what other people needed. That's when I started what I call the identity experiments. And this is practical. This is something you can do right now if you're in a similar place. If you're realizing that you don't know who you are outside of the roles you've played, every week, I tried on a new identity, not fake, not permanent, just experimental, just to see what fit. Week 1. I'm someone who travels alone. I took a weekend trip to the coast. By myself, no plans, no itinerary. Just got in the car and drove. And I learned things. I learned that I like to drive in silence, not with music. I learned that I prefer small diners to fancy restaurants. I learned that I'm more introverted than I thought, that I don't need constant companionship to feel okay. Week 2. I'm someone who tries new foods. I went to restaurants I'd never been to, ordered things I couldn't pronounce. And I learned that I actually hate sushi, which Robert had always loved and I'd pretended to enjoy. But I love Ethiopian food, and Indian food, and this little Thai place downtown that makes a curry that's so spicy it makes me cry, and I order it anyway because I love it. Week 3. I'm someone who speaks up in groups. I joined a book club, and instead of sitting quietly and agreeing with whatever the dominant opinion was, I shared my actual thoughts, even when they were different, even when they were unpopular. And I learned that I have strong opinions about character development, that I hate ambiguous endings, that I love stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Week 4. I'm someone who creates instead of consumes. I took that painting class I mentioned, and I learned that I'm terrible at realistic painting, but I actually have a knack for abstract stuff. That I love the feeling of putting color on canvas without trying to make it look like something, just letting it be what it is. Each week, I tried something new, became someone slightly different, and slowly, a picture started to emerge. Not a complete picture. I don't know if anyone ever has a complete picture of themselves, but a truer picture, based on actual experience instead of assumption or performance. And here's what I discovered. Identity is not discovered. It's decided. You're not uncovering who you are. You're deciding who you're becoming. And that's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Because if identity is decided, then you're not bound by your history, not bound by the version of yourself you've been, not bound by what other people expect or need or want. You can choose, every day, every moment, who you're going to be, what you're going to value, how you're going to show up. This is so different from how we're taught to think about identity. We're taught that there's a true self buried deep inside, and our job is to excavate it, to discover it, to be authentic to it. But what if there's no buried true self? What if you're just a collection of choices and experiences and experiments, and your job isn't to discover but to decide? That shift changed everything for me, because it meant I wasn't searching for Eleanor. I was building her. One choice at a time, one experiment at a time, one brave moment of trying something new and seeing if it fit. And some things didn't fit. I tried rock climbing, hated it. Tried joining a choir, hated that too. Tried meditation, fell asleep every time. But some things did fit. The painting, the solo travel, the Ethiopian food, the speaking up in groups, the writing. I started journaling, not about Robert or the betrayal, but about what I was discovering about myself. And slowly, Eleanor started to have substance, started to have preferences and boundaries and desires that were actually hers. Now, I want to pause here and talk about something that might be coming up for you, because if you're watching this and you're thinking, okay, Eleanor, this all sounds great, but how do I trust anyone again? How do I build new relationships when my judgment was so wrong about the most important person in my life? That's the question I wrestled with for months. And here's what I learned. Trust is not binary. It's not an on-off switch. It's not I trust you or I don't trust you. Trust is contextual, gradual, and specific. I trust my neighbor to water my plants. I don't trust her with my deepest fears. I trust my friend to show up on time. I don't trust her to keep a secret. I trust myself to survive hard things. I don't always trust myself to know who's lying. We've been taught to think of trust as this grand declaration. I trust you. I don't trust you. All or nothing. But that's not how it works in reality. Real trust is built in tiny increments, through consistent behavior over time, in specific domains. After Robert, I had to completely rebuild my relationship with trust. And here's what that looked like practically. I started small, really small. I let a barista recommend a drink. Tiny trust. Did they steer me right? Okay. 1 point for humanity. One piece of evidence that people can be reliable. I told a coworker a small, non-critical secret. Did it stay between us? Yes. Another brick in the foundation. I went on that date with Paul, and I paid attention, not to whether I trusted him necessarily, but to whether I trusted my perception of him. Did my gut align with his words? Did his actions match his claims? Not over one dinner, but over weeks of casual interaction. And here's the crucial shift. I stopped trying to trust people and started trusting my ability to notice inconsistencies, to notice red flags, to notice when something feels off, even if I can't articulate why. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Robert didn't betray me because I failed to trust correctly. He betrayed me because he chose deception, and no amount of vigilance on my part would have fixed that. But I can trust myself to pay attention now, to honor my intuition, to leave when things don't add up instead of explaining them away. If you're still with me, if this is resonating, I need you to do something right now. I need you to pause and think about one relationship in your life. It doesn't have to be romantic. Could be a friendship, a family member, a coworker, where you've been overriding your intuition, where something feels off, but you've been explaining it away. And I need you to leave a comment. You don't have to name the person or give details. Just write, I've been overriding my gut about, and complete that sentence. Maybe it's about how much I give in this friendship. Maybe it's about the way they talk to me. Maybe it's about whether they actually respect my boundaries. Whatever it is, name it. Because when you name it, you give yourself permission to pay attention to it. And then hit subscribe if you haven't already, because in the next section, I'm going to show you exactly how to reclaim memories without needing them to mean what you thought they meant. How to hold your history without letting it hold you. This is where it gets really practical, but I need to know you're still here. So comment, subscribe, and let's keep building together. All right, so we've talked about compassion without reconciliation. We've talked about identity as decision. We've talked about trust as gradual and specific. Now I want to talk about memory, because this is where people get really stuck. How do you hold memories of someone who turned out to be a lie? How do you think about your wedding day, your anniversary, that vacation you took, those quiet mornings over coffee, when you now know the person across from you was living multiple lives? Do you throw out all the memories, decide they were fake, tell yourself you were deluded? Or do you try to salvage them, convince yourself that some of it was real, even if most of it wasn't? Here's what I learned. Memory doesn't require permission to mean something new. Your experience of a moment is real, regardless of someone else's intention. Let me explain what I mean. Our wedding day. In the original story, it was the happiest day of my life, the beginning of our beautiful journey together, proof that true love exists and good people find each other. When I found out about the other women, that memory became poisoned, tainted, a lie I'd believed, evidence of my own foolishness. But here's what I learned to do, and this is the practice I want you to try. I separated my experience from his intention. On that day, I felt joy. I felt hope. I felt loved. I felt like I was beginning something beautiful. Those feelings were real. They happened in my body, in my heart, in my consciousness. They existed independent of what he was thinking or planning or hiding. My internal experience is valid independent of external validation. If you eat a meal and it tastes delicious, and then you find out later the chef hated making it, does that mean it wasn't delicious? Does it mean you didn't enjoy it? Of course not. The chef's attitude doesn't retroactively change your taste buds, so why would Robert's deception retroactively change my experience of moments we shared? Yes, he was living a lie. Yes, he was simultaneously planning other lives, maintaining other relationships. Yes, the context I believed was false, but my experience within that context, my joy, my hope, my love, that was real. So now, when I think about our wedding day, I don't think about what it meant about us. I think about what it revealed about me, about my capacity for hope, about my ability to be fully present in a moment, about the version of myself who believed in something beautiful and committed fully to it. That person, that hopeful, committed, all-in Eleanor, she's not stupid. She's not a victim. She's actually pretty brave. And I don't have to throw her away just because the story changed. I can acknowledge the lie and still claim the experience. They're both real. This is the work. This is the daily practice of rebuilding, not erasing the past, not pretending it didn't happen or that it didn't hurt, but separating what happened from what it means, taking back the power to assign meaning. Robert doesn't get to decide what our wedding day means to me now, or what our marriage meant, or even what his betrayal means. I decide. I'm the one who has to live with the memories. So I'm the one who gets to choose what they're evidence of. And I choose to let them be evidence of my capacity to love fully, trust deeply, and stay open even when it's risky. Those are qualities I'm proud of. Those are things I want to keep. The fact that he didn't match that energy, that's his loss, his limitation, his tragedy. Not mine. Mine is what I build next. So here's the practice. Take a memory that feels tainted. Write it down exactly as you remember it. Don't edit. Don't analyze. Just describe what happened from your perspective. Then write this question. What was true about my experience in this moment? Not was he honest, but what did I genuinely feel? What was actually present for me in that moment? Then write this. What meaning can I give this now? Not what did it mean then based on false premises, but what meaning can I assign it now that serves me? You're not erasing the past. You're reclaiming authorship of what it means. You're taking back the power to say this moment taught me X about myself, instead of letting it be evidence of his deception. This practice changed everything for me. I went through dozens of memories this way, and what I found was that almost all of them revealed something valuable about me, even if they revealed nothing true about him. The time he surprised me with flowers? That memory isn't evidence that he loved me. It's evidence that I'm someone who lights up at small gestures of care. That's about me. That's mine to keep. The vacation we took to the mountains? That memory isn't evidence that we had a good marriage. It's evidence that I love being in nature, that I'm someone who finds peace in quiet spaces. That's about me. The quiet Sunday mornings reading the paper together? That memory isn't evidence that we were compatible. It's evidence that I value companionable silence, that I'm someone who doesn't need constant entertainment or conversation. That's about me. See how that works? Every memory becomes data about yourself instead of evidence about the relationship. And once you make that shift, the memories lose their power to hurt you, because they're not about him anymore. They're about you. Now let's talk about something harder. Let's talk about the relationship you're really rebuilding, the one with yourself. Because when someone lies to you on this scale, it doesn't just break trust in them, it breaks trust in your own perception. You start thinking, how did I not see it? What's wrong with me? Can I trust my own judgment? Am I just fundamentally bad at reading people? Will I fall for this again? And that's the deepest wound. Not what he did, but what you believe about yourself because of what he did. So the real work isn't learning to trust other people again. It's learning to trust yourself. To trust that you're not stupid or blind or naive. To trust that you made the best choices you could with the information you had. To trust that you're not doomed to repeat this. And here's how I did it. I started keeping promises to myself. Tiny ones at first. I'll go to bed by 10. I'll drink water before coffee. I'll take a walk when I said I would. Every kept promise was evidence. Evidence that I'm trustworthy, that I follow through, that I can count on me. Then bigger ones. I'll leave the job that's draining me. I ended up doing that, by the way. Left the law firm after 20 years because I realized I was only staying out of inertia, out of this belief that I couldn't handle change. I'll end the friendship that's one-sided. I had a friend who only called when she needed something, who never asked how I was doing. And I'd maintained that friendship because I thought that's what you do. You're loyal, you show up. But loyalty to someone who doesn't reciprocate isn't loyalty, it's self-abandonment. So I ended it. Kindly, but firmly. And it hurt. But it also freed up space for friendships that were actually mutual. I'll stop waiting for permission to live. This was the biggest one. For 30 years I'd waited for Robert's approval, his permission, his buy-in on decisions, and for 15 years after that I'd waited for, I don't even know what. Some sign from the universe that I was allowed to move forward? But you don't need permission. Not from anyone. Not even from yourself, really. You just need to choose. And then choose again. And then keep choosing. Every time I kept a promise to myself, the relationship rebuilt. Not with him. With me. I became my own reliable person. The one I could count on. The one who showed up. The one who followed through. And from that foundation, everything else became possible. Because when you trust yourself, you don't need other people to be perfect. You just need to trust that you can handle whatever they are. You can handle if they turn out to be lying. You can handle if they're not who they seemed. You can handle if the relationship doesn't work out, because you've got you, and you is reliable. That's the shift from victim to author, from someone who has things done to them to someone who decides what happens next. Not what happens to you, you can't always control that, but what you do with what happens. That's all yours. Now I want to tell you about something that happened about a year into this process. Something that tested everything I'd learned. something that showed me I was stronger than I thought. I ran into Margaret. Remember Margaret, the veterinarian from Austin? One of Robert's other, I don't even know what to call us. Victims sounds too passive. Partners sounds too legitimate. Let's just say one of the other women. I was at a conference for work, Administrative Professionals Conference in Dallas, and she was there presenting on pet therapy in office environments. I saw her name on the schedule and I froze. Part of me wanted to skip her session, avoid the whole thing, but another part of me was curious, wanted to see her in person, wanted to understand what Robert had seen in her, what made her different from me, whether she'd healed better or worse. So I went, sat in the back, watched her present, and she was good, confident, funny, smart. She talked about her dog, a golden retriever named Milo, and how bringing him to work had changed the entire office culture. And I felt nothing hostile, no jealousy, no resentment, just curiosity. This was a woman who'd been through something similar to me, who'd loved the same man, or a version of him, who'd been lied to in similar ways. After her presentation, I went up to her. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was going to say, didn't have a plan. "Margaret?" I said. She looked at me, and I saw recognition flicker across her face. We'd never met in person, but Jessica had connected us all briefly in a group chat that had fizzled out after a few weeks. We'd shared photos. We knew what each other looked like. "Eleanor," she said. Not a question, a statement. "Yeah, hi. I just, I saw you were presenting and I wanted to say hi, see how you're doing." We went to the hotel bar, ordered drinks, and we talked for 3 hours about everything. About Robert, yes, but also about our lives, about what we'd learned, about who we were becoming. And here's what I discovered. We were nothing alike. Margaret was outgoing where I was reserved. She was adventurous where I was cautious. She was confrontational where I was accommodating. Robert hadn't chosen us because we were similar. He'd chosen us because we were different. Each of us filled a different need, reflected a different facet of whoever he was trying to be. "Do you ever wonder what was real?" Margaret asked at one point. Like, was any of the love real, or was it all just performance? And I said something I'd been thinking about for months. I think it was real for him in the moments it was happening. I think he genuinely felt what he was feeling. He just couldn't sustain it, couldn't integrate all the different versions into one coherent person, so he kept them separate. And we each got a piece of something real, just never the whole. Margaret nodded. "That's generous, more generous than I've been able to be." "It's not generosity," I said. "It's self-preservation, because if I make him a monster, then I'm a victim. And I don't want to be a victim anymore. I want to be someone who experienced something hard and chose to grow through it." We talked about our healing processes. She'd gone the therapy route, deep dive into attachment theory and trauma processing. I'd gone the experimental route, identity experiments and small daily choices, both valid, both working, both leading us to similar places: wholeness, independence, selves that existed independent of him. Before we parted, Margaret said something that stuck with me. "You know what the worst part was? Not the lying, not even the betrayal. It was realizing I'd never actually been seen. I'd been useful, I'd been pleasant, I'd been whatever he needed in that moment, but I'd never been seen. And that's what I'm looking for now. Not someone who loves me, but someone who actually sees me. All of me. Even the messy parts." I understood exactly what she meant. Because that's what I was looking for too. Not just in romantic relationships, but in all relationships. People who could handle my full complexity, my contradictions, my growth, my mess. I want to stop here for a second because this might be hitting you in a particular way. If you're realizing that you've spent your life being useful instead of seen, being pleasant instead of real, being what other people needed instead of who you actually are, I need you to acknowledge that. I need you to leave a comment right now that just says, "I want to be seen." That's it. Just those words. Because when you say it, when you claim that desire, you start to make space for it. You start to notice when you're performing versus when you're being real. And that noticing is the beginning of change. So comment, I want to be seen, and then subscribe if you haven't yet, because we're getting to the most important part. The part about how you actually live this, how you take all these insights and turn them into a daily practice that sustains you, how you become the author instead of the character. But I need to know you're here. I need to know this is landing. So comment, subscribe, and let's finish strong together. All right. So we're about a year and a half into this journey now. Year and a half since Jessica knocked on my door. And I want to tell you what my life actually looks like. Not the theory, not the insights, but the practical, daily reality of being someone who's rebuilt from rubble. I wake up in the morning and I make my coffee, with cinnamon and honey. I sit at my table, which is arranged differently now, facing the window instead of facing where Robert used to sit, and I do a practice I call the morning inventory. 3 questions. Same ones every day. What story am I telling myself about yesterday? Is that story serving me or trapping me? What would I choose if I weren't trying to be consistent with that story? Some days the answers are simple. Story: I'm tired and overwhelmed. Serving or trapping? Trapping. I'm using tiredness as an excuse to avoid things that matter. What would I choose? I'd go to that painting class even though I don't feel like it. Some days the answers are complex. Story: I'm someone who was betrayed and can't trust anyone. Serving or trapping? Trapping. It's keeping me isolated. What would I choose? I'd accept that invitation to dinner even though it scares me. The questions aren't about getting it right, they're about staying conscious, about not sleepwalking through my life the way I did for so many years. After the morning inventory, I write in my journal. Not about Robert, not about the past, about what I'm discovering about myself, about experiments I'm trying, about things that surprised me, about moments where I felt fully alive. This practice keeps me oriented toward growth instead of grief, toward becoming instead of mourning. Then I go to work. I actually started a new job, left the law firm, and now I work at a nonprofit that helps women rebuild after domestic violence. Administrative work, same as before, but the mission matters to me in a way the law firm never did. And I'm good at it, because I understand what it's like to have your reality shattered, to question everything, to need to rebuild from the ground up. I can't counsel them, I'm not trained for that, but I can be present, can offer practical help, can witness their process without trying to fix it. After work, I usually do something for myself. Painting class twice a week, book club once a week. Sometimes I just go for a walk. Or I call Jessica and check in on how Sophie's doing. She's almost 2 now, starting to talk. And Jessica sends me videos that make me laugh. Evenings I usually read. I've discovered I love mysteries. Which is funny given that I've stopped trying to solve the mystery of Robert. But fictional mysteries are satisfying in a way real ones aren't. They have resolutions, clues that make sense, justice that's clear, and before bed, I do another practice. The Uncertainty Journal. I write down one thing I don't know and don't need to know. I don't know if Robert is still alive, and I don't need to know. I don't know if he ever actually loved me, and I don't need to know. I don't know if I'll ever have another romantic relationship, and I don't need to know. This practice trains me to be comfortable with mystery, with not having all the answers, with living in the questions instead of demanding certainty. Because here's what I've learned: certainty is overrated. Certainty is often just a story you're clinging to because uncertainty feels too scary. But uncertainty is where growth happens, where possibility lives, where you're free to become something new because you're not bound by what you think you know. Now, does this mean I'm healed? Does this mean I never have hard days? Does this mean I've completely moved on and Robert never crosses my mind? No, absolutely not. I still have days where the anger comes back sharp and unexpected. Where I'm driving to work and suddenly I'm furious all over again about the wasted years, the lies, the performance. I still have moments where I see a couple holding hands and I feel this deep ache for what I thought I had, for the companionship I lost. Even if it was never real, the feeling of it was. And I miss that feeling. I still have dreams where Robert is alive and we're still married and everything is fine. And I wake up confused about which reality I'm in. Those dreams are getting less frequent, but they still happen. And that's okay. That's part of being human. You don't heal in a straight line. You don't arrive at some destination called over it and plant a flag. You heal in spirals. You circle back to the same wounds at different levels, each time with a little more wisdom, a little more distance, a little more capacity to hold the pain without being consumed by it. So when the hard days come, I have practices for those too. I let myself feel what I'm feeling without judgment. I don't try to positive think my way out of it. I don't tell myself I should be over this by now. I just sit with it, feel it, let it move through me. And then I make a choice about what to do next. Not a choice based on the feeling, but a choice based on my values, based on who I'm becoming. If I'm feeling angry, I might go for a run, or paint something aggressive and chaotic, or write a letter I'll never send where I say all the things I'm still angry about. If I'm feeling sad, I might call Jessica or Margaret, might go sit in a coffee shop and people watch, might watch a movie that makes me cry so I can cry about something other than my own life. If I'm feeling scared about trusting someone new, I might journal about what specifically scares me, might talk to my therapist, might try the thing that scares me anyway and see what happens. The point is, I don't avoid the feelings, but I also don't let them make my decisions for me. I feel them, and I choose what comes next. That's agency. That's authorship. That's being a whole person who can hold complexity without falling apart. Now let's talk about the future, because that's what all of this is really about. Not understanding the past, but building a future that's actually yours. I don't know what my future holds. I don't know if I'll fall in love again. Don't know if I want to. Some days I think yes, I'd like to share my life with someone. Other days I think I'm perfectly happy alone. I'm learning to be okay with not knowing. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why Robert did what he did. Don't know if he's found healing or if he's just created new versions of the same patterns in new places. And I'm okay with not knowing that too. What I do know is this: I'm building a life that's mine, fully, finally, irreversibly mine. Not in reaction to him, not in spite of him, just mine. A life where I wake up and make choices based on what I actually want instead of what I think I should want. Where I'm surrounded by people who see me, not just the version of me that's convenient for them. Where I'm learning and growing and experimenting instead of staying frozen in preservation. A life where I'm the author, where I hold the pen, where the narrative is mine to write. And that life isn't perfect, isn't finished, isn't some Instagram-worthy transformation where everything is healed and whole and enlightened. It's messy, it's complicated, it's full of contradictions and uncertainties and moments where I still don't know what I'm doing. But it's real. It's mine. And that's everything. So let me bring this home. Let me give you the final lessons. The things I want you to carry forward if you take nothing else from this. First, you are allowed to be multiple things simultaneously. You can be angry and compassionate, heartbroken and hopeful, grieving the past and excited about the future, scared and brave, lost and finding your way. You don't have to resolve the contradictions. You don't have to land on one feeling, one truth, one story. You just have to keep showing up with all of it. Second, forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else. It's a cage you unlock for yourself. And the lock doesn't require their presence, doesn't require their apology, doesn't require their understanding or acknowledgement or change. It just requires your decision to stop letting what they did determine who you become. I've forgiven Robert, not because he deserves it, not because he asked for it. Not because what he did was okay, but because holding on to the bitterness was exhausting, because I needed that energy for building instead of destroying, because forgiveness isn't about him, it's about me. And forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, doesn't mean I trust him or want him in my life or think what he did was excusable. It just means I've stopped letting him live rent-free in my head, stopped giving him power over my present by staying stuck in the past. Third, the relationship you're really rebuilding is with yourself. And that relationship is built through kept promises, through honoring your intuition, through showing up for yourself even when it's hard, through making choices that reflect your values instead of your fears. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you rebuild trust. Every time you honor a boundary, you rebuild respect. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you rebuild strength. And slowly, incrementally, you become your own reliable person, the one you can count on, the one who shows up, the one who doesn't abandon you even when everyone else does. Fourth, you don't need the truth to move forward. You need the courage to live without it. Because the truth you're chasing, the complete understanding, the full explanation, the why that makes it all make sense, that's often just another way of staying attached, another way of making them the center. What if you never get the truth? What if you never understand why? What if the story never makes complete sense? Can you build a life anyway? Can you find meaning anyway? Can you move forward anyway? The answer is yes, absolutely yes, because your life isn't about their truth. It's about your choices. And finally, the worst thing that happened to you can become the intervention you needed. Not because it was good, not because you're glad it happened, not because everything happens for a reason in some cosmic sense, but because everything that happens becomes raw material for what you build next. And you get to decide what you build: a monument to victimhood, a fortress of bitterness, a museum where you preserve every hurt and display it for visitors, or a life, a real one, grounded in who you actually are, not who you thought you were supposed to be. I'm choosing the life, every day, every moment. I'm choosing to build instead of mourn, to grow instead of shrink, to open instead of close. And it's hard. God, it's hard. But it's also the most alive I've ever felt, the most real, the most fully me. Here's what I want you to do right now. I want you to make a decision, not about them, not about what happened, not about whether you forgive, or forget, or understand, but about yourself, about who you're choosing to become. And I want you to leave a comment with this sentence: I choose to, and complete it. Maybe it's, I choose to stop waiting for closure. Maybe it's, I choose to trust myself again. Maybe it's, I choose to build something new. Whatever it is, claim it. Say it out loud to yourself and to this community. Because when you say it, you make it real. And then subscribe if you haven't already, because your journey doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. And I want to walk with you. I want to hear about your experiments and your growth and your moments of courage. So comment, subscribe, and know that you're not alone in this. You're part of a community of rebuilders, of authors, of people who refuse to let the worst thing become the final thing. So here we are, almost 2 years since the knock, since Jessica showed up with her pregnant belly and her photos and her impossible truth that shattered everything I thought I knew. And you know what? I'm grateful. I'm actually grateful that she knocked. Not because I enjoyed the pain, not because I'm glad Robert lied, not because any of this was pleasant or fair or deserved, but because that knock shattered an illusion I might have lived inside for the rest of my life. I was sleepwalking, haunting my own existence, building shrines to a past that never existed while life, real, messy, complicated life, was happening all around me. That pregnancy, those photos, that impossible revelation, it was a violent awakening. And violence is sometimes what's required. We don't change when things are comfortable. We change when the ground gives out beneath us. The collapse is the opening. The shattering is the beginning. Rock bottom is brutal, yes, but rock bottom is also solid. It's the place where you can finally stop falling and start building. All the years I spent healing from Robert's death, I was actually just hovering, suspended in amber. Not falling, but not landing either. That doorway moment was the landing. Hard, sudden, undeniable. And only from solid ground, even if that ground is rubble, can you build something real. So here's my final question for you. What if the worst thing that happened to you is actually the intervention you needed? What if the betrayal is the truth teller? What if the collapse is the foundation? I'm not saying everything happens for a reason. I'm saying everything that happens becomes the raw material for what you build next. You can build a monument to victimhood. You can build a fortress of bitterness. You can build a museum where you preserve every hurt and display it for visitors. Or you can build a life, a real one, grounded in who you actually are, not who you thought you were supposed to be. I chose the life, and I'm building it one choice at a time, one morning inventory at a time, one kept promise at a time, one experiment at a time, and you can too. You can take the pieces of your shattered story and build something entirely new, something that doesn't require anyone else's truth to stand firm, something based on your values, your choices, your vision. You don't need permission. You don't need closure. You don't need the truth. You just need the courage to pick up the pen and start writing. Here's your mantra. The thing I want you to carry forward. The thing I want you to say to yourself when the hard days come. When the doubt creeps in. When you're tempted to go back to the comfortable lie instead of the uncomfortable truth. I am not what was done to me. I am what I chose to become through it. Say it. Mean it. Tattoo it on your heart if you have to. Because the narrative you've been living inside, the one about who you are, what you deserve, what's possible for you, it's just one story. And if it's not serving you, you can write a different one. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need anyone's validation. You don't need the story to make sense. You just need to decide. Who do you want to be? Not who were you, not who should you be, who do you choose to be? That's the only question that matters, and the answer is entirely up to you. If this resonated with you, if you've felt seen or challenged or less alone through this journey, I want to invite you to do something. Leave a comment telling me what you're taking from this. It could be one word, one sentence, one insight, just something to mark this moment, to acknowledge that you were here and something shifted, and subscribe. Because your story doesn't end here. This is just the beginning of the next chapter. And I want to be part of your community as you write it. I want to hear about your victories and your struggles, your experiments and your discoveries, your moments of courage and your moments of doubt, because we're all in this together. All of us who've had our realities shattered, all of us who are learning to build from rubble, all of us who are choosing authorship over victimhood. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're exactly where you need to be. And you're braver than you know. This is Eleanor. And I'm so grateful you stayed with me through both chapters. Grateful you were willing to look at the hard stuff with honest eyes. Grateful you're choosing to build instead of break. You're not broken. The story broke. And that's different. You're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to be real. You're going to be whole. You're going to be free. And there's nothing more powerful than that. Now go write your next chapter. I'll be here cheering you on.